All right. Hey, folks, it's Faz here from Faz Lifts, and today's topic is going to be how long you should diet for. Now, this is kind of a follow up to the video I released earlier in the week, which is looking at how hard you should diet. And I touched on it a little bit in that video, but I wanted to flesh that out a bit more because it's quite important. So let's get on with the video. Now, I think the first consideration to discuss is when fat loss phases are too short, because I think this probably happens more often than not. So now, in the first roughly 2 weeks of any diet, you can lose quite a lot of weight. And typically this is what I see. I mean, myself, I will drop anywhere between 6 to 8 pounds in those first couple of weeks, which looks great, right? And it's actual weight. So water comes off and everything looks leaner, face looks leaner, all that kind of stuff. So, but if you then come off the diet, go back to regular eating, higher caloric intake, a lot of that piles back on and faster than you might think. So it's not clear whether you're just not shifting a lot of glycogen and water in those first 2 weeks. Now, clearly, if you're in a deficit, you're still going to be dropping body fat, sure, but it's not going to be anywhere near the magnitude of the weight loss, right? So it'll be a small proportion of the actual full weight loss in those first couple of weeks because you just drop so much glycogen and water. And I see it in regular populations a lot. They'll drop like 10 pounds in a month. They'll think, yeah, this is fantastic. And before you know it, they're off the diet and they're back to where they started and they can't figure out what happened. The sad thing about that is because they're in a deficit for such a short amount of time, it's not enough to lose substantial amount of fat, but it's also long enough to detract from any muscle gains, assuming they're working out. So it's a really bad situation. If you're constantly flitting between I want to go on a diet, oh, I don't want to go on a diet, I want to go on a diet, I don't want to go on a diet, it can really mess up your progress long term. And that could be for a number of reasons. Perhaps it's just psychologically you're not cut out for the diet, or perhaps you just binge and then you kind of diet it off again. I mean, that's a bad way to do things. It's very unlikely that you're going to gain substantial muscle or leanness doing that approach. So it's very close to where you first started, and it's really easy to slip back to just the same look you had all along. And so the reality is, if you just cut for a really short period of time, you're never really going to see any substantial changes in your physique. You'll never get that much leaner. You'll never really do much. I can tell you, when I did my big cut last year, I say big cut, it was about 6 weeks of quite hard cutting. I ended that in about April last year, 2021. And I didn't feel like I needed to cut again till probably 6 months afterwards, or maybe more. I think it was 7 months after. But anyway, I gained about 6 kilos in 6 months and I was still pretty lean. So that's a good way to do it. You do a hard diet for 6 weeks, then you gain for 6 months. That's a nice way to do it. And even that's a fairly short diet, but I think 2 weeks is probably just a little bit too short. Next thing is, habits are a lot harder to ingrain. So I remember when I did my contest prep, it was 2018. After that point, I never really ate the same way again. Like I did that contest prep. Some of you saw my before and afters. They were pretty dramatic, 40 pounds of loss and a big change. Now, my habits before then, after then, were completely different. And it's one of the reasons why I can stay so much lighter now, because I'm just used to being tighter on my diet. The food options which are more normal are better. I like to say that most people idle along at about 80%, right, of what they can maximally do at any one time, whether that's adherence to the diet or whatever. And sure, your adherence goes up to 100% when you're on a contest prep, but afterwards you go back to 80%. The only thing is you've leveled up, right? So your 80% is a lot further along than where it used to be. And I think you'll find that with most people. I mean, you could argue the physiological debate about whether it's easier to gain fat or lose fat, the P ratio stuff, but actually psychologically and just in terms of habits, if you're on a contest prep diet for that long, a lot of your habits are very much ingrained by the end of it, and it's harder and harder to break out of those back into your bad habits. If you're just on a diet for about 2 weeks, you can't really shift any of those big habits. They're still very well entrenched, and you can slip back into them very easily. So, that takeaway that you must have on a Friday, that piece of chocolate you must have every lunchtime, like all those little habits which add to caloric load over the course of the day and week, it's very easy to slip back into those if a diet phase is too short. So too short, no good. I would say like 2 weeks is probably a little bit too short. Next up, what if it's too long? Now, the problem with the diet being too long is you end up almost identifying with your diet, right? It's like, hello, my name's John. 45 years old. I work as an accountant and I'm on a diet. People just have this, it's like their lifestyle. It's their life. It's part of who they are. It's like Karen from HR, always on a diet, So people end up identifying with the diet. It becomes this roller coaster ride where they're just constantly on a diet. The reality is they're hardly ever on a diet, This is all interspersed with a lot of binge eating, relapses, just general fuckery, So the body simply needs, it just ends up not really being on a diet at all. So anyway, it'll feel like you're on a diet all the time. I talk to people like this and they feel like they've been dieting for ages. And a lot of weird things tend to happen because it becomes habitual. Like failing a diet becomes habitual. And these are the type of people who end up eating way more calories than they think they're eating because they've just got no idea. Their processes are horrible. Their habits are terrible. And they don't have much of an idea about what it is to diet. So when you finally put them on a diet, they think, right, signed up with Faz, paid money, this is going to be amazing. And they do all the same things as they were previously until you tell them. And then they go, oh, right, you want me to weigh out my peanut butter? Oh, I've just been putting it in by the spoonful and counting it as a portion, and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it comes with a lot of fuckery. Like the long-term dieters are probably some of the worst to help and the hardest to help because their idea of what it means to diet is just so skewed. They've basically just been eating either at maintenance or in a surplus for years. But they think they're at a deficit, so they don't really ever understand what it means to be on a diet. And you have to really teach them out of that. So, other problem with the fat loss phase being too long is after a while, your body simply needs a break. Okay. Now, this is different to the second point I've just explained. When you have people who are on a diet for so long that they end up identifying with a diet and relapsing and just general fuckery, that is more of, say, a mental issue there. This, what I'm talking about here, is more of a physical issue. Like a lot of times, guys and girls who are genuinely on a diet for such a long time, they simply need an actual break. Assuming they've lost a reasonable amount of weight and they're actually dieting, physiologically, they just need a break. Like their body is screaming out, like, look, hormones are down, health is just generally down, they need a break. So that's a good reason to not to extend dieting phases for too long. There was a sort of a trend a while back where even Nazi competitors were just dieting for longer and longer and longer for competitions, and it's just so problematic. There's one guy around here who's actually a PT, weirdly enough, prepped for like 6 months, and he's natural. He looked horrific by the end of it. He was doing all kinds of binge eating and God knows what else, and he just dieted so slowly. He was on a diet for 6 months, and by the end, he was just exhausted. He didn't have the mental capacity necessary to handle being at that low body fat because he was just exhausted. So he binged his way into the show, binged his way out of the show, ended up now looking worse than he ever has. The exact opposite of what you want in bodybuilding, and got onto Instagram talking about how bodybuilding's so hard and it's terrible for your relationship with food. It's like, no, you effed up. So he was dieting for far too long, as well as other general fuckery. But the point stands: do not diet for way too long. It's like 6 months diets. They can have their place, but as long as there's a purpose, there's a goal, there's a deadline, and you are making progress. I think just a general, when it gets too long, it's more the case of they're on the diet, they're off the diet, they're on the diet, they're off the diet. You get all the diet fatigue and none of the benefits. It's not a good thing to do. And finally, the other way you're dieting for too long is, the problem is you risk performance loss. Muscle loss is generally not a big issue if you can carry on lifting the weights that you are. Performance loss is what fuels muscle loss, in my experience. If you can keep the performance, if you could do everything you can to keep performance right about there, you shouldn't lose that much muscle. But once your performance starts to tank, and it will do if you've been dieting for so long, then you risk muscle loss. Okay. So what is just right? I would give this as pretty decent guidelines. Now, bear in mind, this is based on people I've worked with. So this is my experience, all right? As a general rule, and there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, but as a general rule, mini cuts of about 4 to 8 weeks work very well. You'll notice that my mini cut last year was 6 weeks, and that was right about there. If you're committed, you can do a lot in 6 weeks, like a lot. A regular cut, 4 to 26 weeks, depending on how much you've got to lose. You might even want to combine that with some maintenance phases as well. And a contest prep cut of about 12 to 26 weeks works about right. Bearing in mind with contest prep cuts, you are dieting slower. You might still diet quite fast at the beginning, particularly if you're enhanced, but you're generally dieting slower, and you're going to be in better shape before you start the diet. And if you are doing a 26-week prep, it might mean that about halfway through that prep, or maybe a little bit more than halfway, you might have a maintenance phase. There's sort of 2 phases to a contest prep diet. I don't want to go on about it too much because it's not the point of this video, but it's kind of 2 phases to a contest prep diet. You want to get to striking range, which you can go relatively fast, then take a break, hold it, get comfortable, and then do the final cut, which is really hard. That's the 10% into like 6% type of cut, which gets you really peeled. The cut where you just see your abs, that's just a beach cut. That's just a regular cut. The contest prep cut is a regular cut with an additional contest prep ending. That's the difference. But yeah, so for a regular cut, 4 to 26 weeks with maintenance phase is about right. With the contest prep cut, 12 to 26, assuming we're looking in a phasic model where we have different phases of the cut. And if you refer back to my video about how hard you should cut, I can point you to rates of fat loss and stuff that you should aim for. But in general, certainly, as I said in the last video, the closer you are to very, very lean, the slower the cut should be. So, okay, cool. Hopefully that was an interesting video. I thought it would be a good idea. I like to plan things. Like me with my clients, I like to plan things out. Loose plans, like you're not going to say, okay, I'm doing a cut no matter what for 12 weeks. You want to just say, okay, for the next 12 weeks or the next block of training, I work in blocks of training. I like to do that. So like if I was planning a cut for 12 weeks, then I might break that up into 2 blocks of training, 6 weeks and 6 weeks. So I can evaluate, evolve the training over the course of the cut. So I can keep an eye on things. That's how I like to do things. It keeps people mentally focused. So yeah, I think if it just gives you an idea to know what to expect. I think control is a big psychological factor when it comes to fat loss. The more in control you feel of your emotions, the more you plan things out, the more you can control hunger and all that kind of stuff, the better you're going to feel. So it's a big deal. I would definitely recommend thinking about these kind of things when you're about to begin a cut. Lay out, how long do I want to cut for? Be open to change, but just lay it out and go from there. But yeah, interesting. Anyway, I will call it there, and I will speak to you in the next one. If you have any comments about that, pop them down below, and I'll hopefully, and I'll try and explain. Okay.